The MCAT will likely be the most difficult test that you have to take to get into medical school. The questions on the MCAT are very different from typical test questions that you see on normal college tests. This is because they do a great job testing how well you can explain the why behind information, which forces you to think about multiple topics at once and see how they all connect. In this video, we are going to go over how to study in a way that I think prepares you for these types of questions. So first, let's look at two example questions to show the difference between a standard college test question and a typical MCAT test question. Both questions are going to ask you about how an acid's strength relates to its pKa value. First, let's look at a typical college-style test question. This question requires you to know that the lower the pKa is for an acid, the more acidic it will be. If you know this fact, then you can easily choose option A as the correct answer. Here's an example of how the MCAT might test your knowledge about this same topic. This question requires you to not just know what pKa means, but also to understand what things influence the value of a molecule's pKa. This forces you to make connections to multiple other chemistry topics. To fully explain each answer option in this question, you would have to be able to draw Lewis structures, identify resonance structures, and understand the concepts of inductive effects and atomic radius. We won't go over those topics in this video or how to actually answer this question, but hopefully this helps you see that MCAT style questions require you to know the why behind information, which often forces you to draw from multiple topics at once. This makes it crucial that your study approach helps you to see the interconnectedness of material and that you have the ability to recall information from any topic at any time. I scored a 520 and have tutored hundreds of students for the MCAT, and that experience has helped me deeply understand what is needed to be prepared to answer those MCAT style questions. I've also done a fair amount of investigation into what learning experts have to say about the science of learning. All of that has helped me come up with a way to go over MCAT content that I think is very effective, and the students I tutor often find these techniques to be more useful than the approaches they were using before. The rest of this video is going to discuss how to go over your content source, whether that is a textbook, videos, or any other resource. This video won't go over how to use practice questions, but that will be covered in a future video. As I go over this process, I will briefly touch on some of what I have learned from the various resources that discuss the learning sciences. I would strongly suggest doing your own investigation into that topic to help yourself understand how to make studying more effective. Here are some of the YouTube channels and the books that helped introduce me to the science of learning and continue to be valuable resources. By learning more about this topic, you can make informed decisions if you want to make adjustments to the approach that I'm about to suggest. You can use this approach for any content resource like textbooks or videos, but in this video, we are going to use a PDF from the Ancient Brains content course as an example to work through. Click on the link in the description to open up the course, scroll down to, and open up Unit 31 of General Chemistry. Follow along on your own as we go over each step. Before you even start to read over a topic, give yourself a couple of minutes and recall what you can about that topic. The idea here is that recalling that information brings it to the conscious part of your mind, and that can make it easier to read and process material that is related to it. Now pause the video and try to recall what you can about the basics of acids and bases. Once you've done this, put away all note-taking devices and focus all of your attention on only reading. As you read, your goal is to understand the why behind each piece of information and make sure what you are reading actually makes sense. To help with this reading process, ask yourself a couple of questions as you go. First, does this match up with what I have learned in the past? And second, does this make sense given what I know about other topics? These two questions help slow you down and force you to think about each thing as you read. As you read, if you are confused at any time, take the time to reread, Google, use YouTube, or things like ChatGPT to clear up any confusion before moving on. Once you finish reading and understanding the PDF, you are going to make what I call a scaffold. The goal of this is to help give the information in the PDF more structure and organization. To make a scaffold, first write down the title of the PDF in the middle of the page. Now look over the whole PDF and think about how you can organize the information into a few categories. Put in enough thought to categorize the information in a way that makes sense to you instead of just copying down the subunit names. But it is okay if the categories you come up with sometimes do match the subunits. Once you come up with your categories, make a branch off of the main title for each one. Then make a few branches off of each category to further organize the information. For example, the categories I have come up with for this PDF are Lewis acid and base, Bronsted-Lowry acid and base, and the auto-ionization of water. I chose these categories because I like how the rest of the information fits into them. For example, the use of Ka and Kb is only applicable to Bronsted-Lowry acids and bases, so I will put that as a subcategory of that branch. I think that the concept of pH and OH seems like it could be a subcategory for either the Bronsted-Lowry branch or the auto-ionization of water branch. So I will put it in the middle and draw arrows from both categories to it. This is all I'm going to include in this scaffold because I think the rest of the information is details of one or more of these topics. And when you make your scaffolds, you want to avoid writing down the actual details. This is because research suggests that the act of copying down information verbatim does very little to boost understanding or memorization of material. So avoid doing that with your scaffolds, and in place of that traditional approach to note-taking, we are going to use a technique called free recall to cover the details that we did not write down. Free recall is the act of recalling information without using any hints or cues. For each of the subcategories in the scaffold, try to recall all of the details from memory. As you do this, you can write down those details in the appropriate spots in the scaffold, and it's probably beneficial to do so. Writing down the information from memory instead of copying it from the PDF will have a much stronger effect on your ability to retrieve the information later. Once you have recalled all that you can, look at the PDFs and see what information you failed to recall. Record your mistakes somewhere and work on committing them to memory. The end goal is to be able to recall all of the details without needing to look at anything more than just your scaffold. So it's crucial that your scaffold does not have any of the details written in it. One of the biggest mistakes that students make is to confuse the ability to recognize something with the ability to recall it. If you're looking at a piece of information and you feel like it is familiar enough that you will be able to recall it on the test, that is actually only proving that you recognize it, and that is not enough for the MCAT. It is very easy to recognize information and tempting to think that you will be able to recall it without any hints later on. But do not fall into this temptation. You have to have actually recalled information multiple times without looking at any hints before you can confidently trust that you'll be able to recall it on test day. Additionally, every time you free recall something, it strengthens your memory of it while recognition does not. An example of this that most people can relate to is how the use of GPS to get somewhere prevents you from memorizing the route. If you always use GPS to go somewhere, there's a good chance you won't have the route memorized, even after driving to the same place multiple times. However, if you attempt to drive there without the GPS, you'll likely have it memorized after just a couple of attempts, because when you go without the GPS, you are actively trying to recall how to get there, which strengthens your memory of the route. For your scaffolds, you will want to practice recalling the information shortly after you create the scaffold, but also be sure to do it again after more time has passed to make sure that you can still do it even after you haven't seen the material for several days. In a later video, I will go over how you can create a schedule that has days built in to work on this. In that video, I will also talk more about when to do practice questions, but for now, I will just mention that practice questions are most effective when done throughout your entire study process. So after you make your scaffolds for a certain topic and practice recalling that information, it's time to do practice questions over that topic. As you do practice questions, you'll probably develop a better understanding of the information and more clearly understand the why behind things. Take the time to record these understandings in your scaffolds. For example, a practice question may teach you that acid strength has some connection to electronegativity, and you can easily show this in your scaffolds by drawing a connecting arrow between the two topics and writing a quick note that describes the relationship. Then when you practice free recall again, use the scaffolds you originally made that do not have the connections drawn out, and try to recall those connections from memory in addition to the rest of the information for those scaffolds. Repeat this process for all of the information and continuously update your scaffolds as you do more practice questions and refine your understanding. If you do that and can get all of the information on a recall basis, you will be well prepared for the test. I would still recommend to everyone that they learn more about the science of studying and learning, and the resources I mentioned earlier are a great place to start. Learning more will help you make more educated decisions about how to study, which will pay off tremendously during your MCAT prep and even more during medical school. In the next two videos of this series, I will go over how to properly use and get the most out of practice questions, and then I'll talk about how to create a plan and schedule to get through all of the content while doing enough practice questions.